Aston Martin's car is so broken. Their drivers can't even push it. Not because they're slow. Because it's physically dangerous. We're talking about vibrations so extreme. They can't complete a full race at maximum pace without risking injury. And yet, this same car might be hiding one of the biggest performance jumps of the entire grid. Because after China, Aston Martin didn't just react. They made a decision. A radical one. They're preparing a completely new engine approach. A B-Spec Honda system. Mid-season. And if this works, it doesn't just fix reliability. It unlocks a car that insiders believe has massive untapped speed. But if it fails, this could become one of the biggest collapses of the new era. Because what Aston Martin discovered in China was not just a flaw. It was the exact point where their entire project breaks. So the real question is not how bad things are right now. The real question is, what happens if they suddenly fix everything at once? China didn't just show that Aston Martin is slow. It showed why they can't go faster. Because every single lap, the car was fighting itself. Not in one corner. Not in one sector. Everywhere. The drivers couldn't lean on it. They couldn't push through the limit. They couldn't build confidence. And in Formula One, that's everything. Because when a driver doesn't trust the car, lap time disappears. Not all at once, but in small moments. A lift here. A hesitation there. A correction mid-corner. And suddenly, you're half a second down. But this wasn't just about confidence. This was physical. The vibrations weren't subtle. They were violent. Coming through the steering wheel. Through the seat. Through the entire structure of the car. And over time, that builds up. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. Until the driver is no longer just racing. They're enduring it. And that changes how you drive. Because instead of attacking, you protect. Instead of extracting performance, you manage the damage. And that's exactly what Aston Martin was doing in China. Not racing to win. Racing to survive. But here's where things become much more interesting. Because even with all those limitations, the car itself is not fundamentally wrong. In fact, quite the opposite. The design is aggressive. Radical. Built to generate performance. The kind of concept that doesn't aim for safe gains, but for big breakthroughs. And that creates a very unusual situation. Because Aston Martin doesn't need to reinvent the car. They just need to make it usable. Which is a completely different problem. And a much more dangerous one. Because usability depends on integration. Not just parts. Not just upgrades. But how everything works together. Engine. Battery. Chassis. Mounting points. Energy flow. Every system interacting at the same time. And right now, that interaction is broken. The engine generates forces the chassis can't absorb. The structure transfers vibrations the battery can't handle. The system destabilizes itself. And once that happens, everything else becomes irrelevant. You can have the best aero, the best concept, the best design philosophy. But if the system isn't stable, you can't use any of it. And that's why this next step is so critical. Because Aston Martin is not chasing performance. They're chasing stability. And once they find it, performance comes automatically. But that's also what makes it so unpredictable. Because stability is not something you add. It's something you achieve. Through balance. Through alignment. Through precision in every component. And that takes time. testing, iteration, mistakes. And right now, they don't have the luxury of time. Because while they're solving this, other teams are moving forward, refining, optimizing, winning, which means Aston Martin is under pressure. Not just to fix the issue, but to fix it fast. And that's why the idea of a B-Spec engine becomes so important. Because this is not a small correction. This is a reset. A different approach to how the entire system works. A new way to control those forces. A new way to stabilize the platform. And if they get it right, everything we saw in China changes instantly. The car becomes drivable, predictable, pushable. And once that happens, the real performance finally appears. But if they get it wrong, the problem doesn't just stay. It grows. And that's the risk Aston Martin is taking right now. Because they're not just trying to improve. They're trying to transform. And transformations in Formula One rarely come without consequences. So now the question becomes unavoidable. Can they solve the most complex problem on the grid before the season slips away? Because solving this problem is not just engineering. It's a race against complexity. Because what Aston Martin is dealing with right now is one of the hardest issues in modern Formula One. Not because it's unknown, but because it sits at the intersection of everything. Engine dynamics, chassis behavior, energy systems, and even aerodynamics. All interacting at the same time. And when something goes wrong there, you don't get a single failure. You get a cascade. One issue triggering another. Vibrations damaging the battery. Battery instability affecting energy deployment. Energy fluctuations changing how the car behaves mid-corner. And suddenly, the entire car feels unpredictable, unstable, almost disconnected. And that's exactly what the drivers are feeling. Not just discomfort, but inconsistency. A car that doesn't respond the same way twice. And for a driver, that's worse than being slow. Because you can't build rhythm. You can't anticipate. You can't commit. But here's where things get even more critical. Because Aston Martin is not starting from a position of strength. They don't have the mileage. They don't have the data. They've completed a fraction of the running other teams have achieved. Which means every decision they make now is based on incomplete information. And that increases the risk. Because when you redesign something this complex, without full understanding, you're not just solving problems. You're guessing. Calculated guesses. But still guesses. And that's why the B-Spec engine is such a bold move. Because it suggests something very specific. They believe they've found the root cause. Not just the symptoms. Not just the damage. The actual source of the vibration. Whether it's a frequency issue, a structural resonance, or the way the engine and chassis are interacting under load. They think they know. And that changes everything. Because once you identify the source, you can redesign around it. You can isolate it, absorb it, redirect it. But doing that means changing how the entire system is built. New mounting solutions, different structural reinforcements, adjusted energy deployment strategies, even changes in how the engine operates across the rev range. This is not a patch. This is a reconfiguration. And that's why the next version of this car won't just feel different. It will behave differently. From the first lap, from the first acceleration zone, from the first time the driver pushes to the limit. But here's the tension. Because even if they fix the vibration, that doesn't guarantee success. Because every solution introduces trade-offs. Add stiffness. You might increase weight. Change mounting. You might affect balance. Adjust energy deployment. You might lose peak performance. And in Formula One, every compromise matters. So Aston Martin is walking a very fine line. Fix the core issue without creating new weaknesses. Stabilize the car without slowing it down. Unlock performance without sacrificing reliability. And that balance is incredibly difficult to achieve. But if they do, everything changes. Because suddenly, they're no longer limited. They're no longer holding back. They're finally operating the car as it was designed. And that's the part most people haven't seen yet. The true version of the AMR26. Not the restricted one. Not the compromised one. The real one. The one Adrian Newey believed had massive potential from the start. And if that version finally appears, the performance gain won't look like an upgrade. It will look like a different car. But until that moment comes, everything remains uncertain. Because in Formula One, potential means nothing without execution. And right now, Aston Martin is about to attempt one of the most complex mid-season transformations on the grid. So the real question is no longer, can they fix the problem? It's this. When they do, will the car finally become what it was always meant to be? Or will it reveal a completely new limitation no one saw coming?